victory. I believe that there's been some victories since we've been apart. If it's nothing more than just another day that you've kept us, Lord, we're giving you thanks for watching over us and carrying us, caring for us. We thank you for being the loving God that you are, that draws us into a relationship and wants to be with us and wants to draw us nearer to you, Lord. We ask you to please bless in this time, in this space, as we go before you to study your word. Help us to clear our hearts and minds out of everything. Bless those who wanted to be out and weren't able to make it today. Bless and make a way for them to be able to keep up with us, Lord, and be able to walk along with us, make it easier for them to get out. We're looking for you to open doors, Lord, to make ways in that respect. Bless us as we're here to be able to listen attentively, to gather what you have to say. Speak words of confirmation and affirmation. Say things to people that I don't even know is going on. We look for your spirit to work above and above everything. Not that they hear my voice, but that they hear your voice in the things that are said, and that it touches their lives and it transforms them, helps them to reach you in a new way, see you better, see you more clearly, understand you more nearly, Lord, more dearly, Lord. These and all blessings we ask. Bless me to be able to teach effectively, efficiently. Let the words that are spoken find a resting place and bring forth fruit in the hearts of each and every person. These and all blessings we ask in your name. Amen. Amen. So it's been a little bit. We had Mother's Day. Happy Mother's Day. I hope everybody had a happy Mother's Day. Just to keep you guys in the loop, Walt let me know he wasn't going to be able to be here for the next, actually probably not until June, because he has to work. He got stuck doing some overtime, but he sends everybody your love, as does John and Candace. They hope to be catching back up with us come next month as well. Angel let me know she wouldn't be able to be here today. So it's always a good when we keep in touch with one another, so we're not worried about and wondering where everyone is going to be. Do want to let you guys know that my mother is back home, which is a wonderful thing. She's still going through physical therapy and everything, but she's doing better. I know she had an appointment Friday. I have to talk to her, find out how that went, but she's back home. God touched and blessed. I don't ever want to see her in that kind of condition again. It was kind of ugly, and I'm not going to get into the details, but she was in a tremendous amount of pain, and we thank God that he resolved the circumstances in the situation and that everything is okay now. And she's another one who sent word that as soon as she can be up and going, she will be back out with us. So we got quite a few folks that want to be here and are trying to be here, and we want God to make ways and open doors so that way they can be here with us more regularly. We're going to get back into what we got into last week. Not last week, last time we met. We have been talking about grace. And what is grace actually? Is it something that you just say over your food? Is grace just when God does stuff for you? What does it mean? What do we refer to when we're talking about grace? Yaris, go ahead.
Grace is some. I'm trying to remember. Grace is what we ask for from God. When I know what I'm trying to say.
Okay. Well, that's why we go through these exercises, to get better at it. Let's try to jog some memories, make some connections. If I talk about patrons and clients, what does that mean? What is a patron? What is a client? What is it, Jade?
Supplier.
Who's a supplier?
Patron.
Patron supplies what?
What the client needs.
Okay. And in a patron-client relationship, is it just the patron gives the client what they need, says thank you, and goes on their way? No. How does it work? Yaris, go ahead.
If a client takes anything from the patron, they are now in a contract sort of way.
I understand what you're saying. I don't like the word contract because it implies something different, but I know that that's the best word that you were looking for. It's not completely inaccurate. Can anybody help him with that? Why don't we like the idea of contract?
Because they're obligated. honor a certain situation with the person being in a relationship.
Right. Contracts are enforceable by law, right?
Okay.
You violate a contract, I can take you to court. And we talked about this a long time ago, difference between contracts and covenants. But I understand there's an agreement, there's an understood obligation that comes with receiving something from somebody in a situation of grace, when somebody's doing you a favor. Just to review a little bit of what we talked about, the word kairos is the word for grace. It also means favor. So when you see these deep preachers who try to distinguish between God's grace and God's favor, that may be the new theology or the new depth of what they're talking about, that they conclusion that they came to. But in the language and in the culture, grace and favor were the exact same thing. And it was used to speak of reciprocity among human beings between mortals and God, or in pagan literature, gods. In other words, it was used to reference a give and take relationship where I do for you, you do something back for me. And then I do for you, and you do something back for me. It's an ongoing relationship, not just I do something for you and you say thanks to go on your way. Now, grace is used in 3 different senses interchangeably. And this is in your notes, but this is important to understand the dynamic that exists and why it's not just a one-way transaction. Grace can refer to the willingness of a patron to grant some benefit to a person in a group. In this sense, favor means favorable disposition. In other words, when somebody says grace, a person has grace, they could be saying that a person is willing to help. Grace, in a second sense, also could be whatever it is that they're actually giving to you. So if you need advice, that advice could be considered grace. If you need a car part that I get for you and you don't know where to find, the actual gift itself could be considered grace. So we've got the willingness to help, and also the help that you actually provide, also being grace. And finally, grace is also used to speak of the response to the benefactor and his or gifts, namely gratitude. So it's both what's given and the attitude with which it's received.
Right.
All 3 of these things are grace, which means that in the dynamic of grace and in the relational dynamic of grace, we're looking for all 3 of those things to exist. And there were rules that govern the way a giver was supposed to give, the way the receiver was supposed to receive, and how the relationship was supposed to work. We covered a lot of it before, but just to refresh your memory, a giver, for example, cannot act from self-interest, but has to act solely in the interest of the person that they're trying to help. So I can't, even though it's a give-take relationship, I don't give to you with the expectation of what I'm gonna get back from you.
Right.
That kind of person is an investor. If I give, whether it's my time, my energy, my advice, my food, money, whatever it is, if I give, I'm doing it simply because I am looking out for your best interest. We talked about the fact that the way that we decide who we're going to provide help to, since we're not looking at what we can get back from them, the way that we decide who we're going to get help to is based on how they have received grace before. In other words, if I've done, to say it differently, if I've done something, if I've tried to help you before and you were not gracious in your response, you did not show gratitude, and we're going to talk about what gratitude is and what it looks like in a little bit, but you didn't show gratitude the first time I helped you, then I may not be inclined to extend grace to you again because your response wasn't with grace. Also, other people, if they find out about how you responded to my act of grace, other people wouldn't be willing to help you either, because you've got develop a reputation for not responding with grace.
Yeah.
You've broken the relationship. You've broken the dance. You just take what you want and gone. So that's what they would look at in determining who they were going to help, not what they could get out of it, not how nice the person was, how articulate they were, how much they liked them, but whether or not this person is likely to honor in the way that they receive whatever the relationship and the dynamic that we're entering into. The noble giver evaluates his or her potential beneficiaries, not in light of any actual return that they might make, not in terms of the value of the gift or services that they might exchange in the future, but in light of the disposition of the receiver's heart toward feeling gratitude, appreciation, and remembering the gift and making whatever return the person is able to, given his or her means. So a lot of times what you would run into is that you have somebody wealthy giving something to somebody who is poor, because there was no middle class in the Bible. Either you were rich or you were pretty much broke. So the person who's giving isn't thinking, I gave them $5,000 worth of food, and so now I'm gonna, I'm not looking for them to reciprocate with $5,000 worth of favors or services. That's not the way it works. I give, and I'm not worried about what I get back. What I'm worried about is from the heart, and what I'm looking at is the attitude that they have towards me, the way that they express their gratitude, and the way that we go about the relationship. Now, I don't know if I'm the only person that's done this or not. I'm sure I'm not. But sometimes you do something for somebody, you try to help them out, and once they've got it, you don't see them no more. That person is not somebody that would be a candidate for further grace down the road. Now, we'll talk more about that later. I don't want to get ahead of myself. I'm just reviewing what we've been over so far. The grace response. So that's the grace giving. The grace response, receiving a favor or kindness meant incurring very directly a debt or obligation. We don't use contract because that's legal, but I owe this person something. There's a debt that I have now. Verbally, within my heart, I know that I owe something to somebody. Even though they're not, let me just move along with this so I don't get ahead of myself. A debt or obligation to respond gratefully, a debt on which a person could not default. Failure to show gratitude was classed as the worst of crimes, being compared to sacrilege against gods. The ingrate committed a crime against the gods, humanity, and ultimately him or herself, while the person who returned grace embodied the highest values of piety and justice and was valued for contributing to the forward movement of the dance of grace on which so much depended. Another way of looking at this, or another way of understanding how things work today, you do something for somebody to try to help them get into a better position. 6 months later, they're in the exact same position that they were before. In understanding that I owe somebody something, sometimes what I owe the person is to actually get better. May not be able to pay it back, but if I'm investing in you to try to see you get better, then I owe it to you to actually be about trying to do better. That's part of the obligation that comes along with it. A lot of times we think, well, that's having strings attached. No, I'm not looking for anything back. I'm investing, not investing, but I am engaging in a relationship with you to try to help you better yourself. What I'm looking for out of you is to see that you are as engaged in trying to help yourself as I am in trying to help you. You owe me that much. You owe it to yourself, first of all, but because I'm trying to help you, you owe me that as well. That I see the effort, that I see you making the moves, making the decisions, making the proper investments that will get you out of the circumstance that I'm trying to help you out of through grace. Gratitude is never a formal obligation. That's why I said that contract wasn't a good word, because contract is a formal. Gratitude is never a formal obligation. There's no advanced calculation on how much of a return you have to provide for a gift given. Nevertheless, the recipient of a favor knows that he or she stands under the necessity of returning the favor that has been received. The element of exchange must settle in the background, being dominated instead by a sense of mutual favor, of mutual goodwill and generosity. I think I asked at the very beginning when we did this, what is a friend? And we were talking about friends being people that you can talk to, that you can confide in, that you can have relationships with. Well, this was the context that they would engage in friendship. My friend is somebody that I am in a relationship with, where there is a give and a take and a back and a forth, and I extended them grace and I respond with grace. That was part of their friendship. Their social structure operated a little bit differently. So within the in-group, outside of your family, you had your friends, and your friends were people that you were within a dynamic and reciprocal relationship with. So what does gratitude look like? And I'm moving through this a little bit fast because this is all review. What is gratitude? What does gratitude look like? There was a quote from last time that we talked about. Both parties should receive a larger share from the friendship, but not a larger share of the same thing. The superior should receive a larger share of honor. The needy one, a larger share of profit. For honor is the due reward of virtue and beneficence. So one of the things that we talked about is that within the context of the relationship, both people get something, but they don't get the same thing. And remember how important honor was in their society. For us, honor, you know, I don't really care what anybody says about me because I'm me and I'm gonna do me, and they can say nice things about me, but that don't put food on the table. Well, back then it kind of did put food on the table because it gains you access to stuff that you might not have otherwise had. The most important thing to them was to be an honorable person. That's why they would kill you over honor and shame, because that was the most important functioning dynamic in their society. So to increase somebody's honor was a big deal to them. So the person who has material or the person who has wisdom is always in search of honor, always looking to, the king, always looking to increase his honor. The peasant, everybody wanted those, you know, everybody wanted more because that's what made them anything. That's what made them mean anything. So the person who has less contributes to the honor of the person who has more. The person who has more stuff contributes to the wisdom or the material of the person who has less, and they both benefit. So what does gratitude look like? There were three things that a person was obligated to do in gratitude. Increase the fame of the giver. Increasing the fame of the giver is part of the proper return for benefits. So that is part of an act of gratitude, is when you get out and you talk to people. We've talked about this over the last couple of lessons. The obligation that when somebody has blessed you, when somebody has done something for you, that you go out and you tell people about it, or you do things that reflect well on the person that has blessed you and done things for you. That was part of their act of gratitude. It wasn't, I'm gonna just receive this and then I'm not gonna tell anybody because I don't really want them to know that I need help or whatever. At one point it said that if you don't want, in their mindset, if you didn't want people to know that you got the help, you shouldn't receive the help. Now, we're private people, we're in a different society, but that was the way that they approached it, that they looked at it. A second component of gratitude comes in expression in relationships of personal patronage and friendship. It is loyalty to that giver. Second component of gratitude is loyalty to the giver. That is showing gratitude and owning one's association with the giver, even when fortunes turn and it becomes costly. There have, let's see, how can we talk about this without being overly dramatic or specific? I think everybody has at some point in time had their name dragged through the mud, and done absolutely nothing. Not justifiably so, but had their name dragged through the mud, become unpopular amongst their peers, amongst their family, for doing what was right or absolutely nothing just because somebody decided that they were going to get an attitude. And when that happens, sometimes the people that are supposed to be your friends disappear. The loyalty, the attitude of loyalty says that even if being friends and associating with this person costs me something, I'm going to maintain that association because I owe them. I'm obligated. They're my patron. So increasing their fame or increasing their honor, being loyal. And we talked about this last time. The principle of loyalty means that clients or friends would have to take care not to become entangled in webs of crossed loyalties. In other words, if me and Glenn got a beef, then you can't be friends with both of us. We try to do that now. You know, two people that got a beef, that's between them, and I'm gonna stay neutral. Being neutral was considered disloyal.
That was disloyal to both parties?
Yep. There was no neutrality. You're gonna pick a side, otherwise you are disloyal to both of us. So you had to be conscientious of who you were going to make your association with and who you were going to be friends with, because it was considered dishonorable and disloyal to be friends with somebody that was the enemy of somebody else. And realistically speaking, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. It's a different thing, but if somebody is mistreating me, because in that day, not being friends with or being an enemy with somebody didn't mean that they just didn't like you. It meant that they were actively trying to sabotage you.
Okay.
It meant that they were working against your interests and trying to undermine you. That's weird.
Yeah, it
It meant that they were actively trying to sabotage you and undermine you. And if I'm trying to mess Glenn up and Glenn's trying to mess me up, how can you be friends with me? Or how can you be friends with both of us? That doesn't work. How can you be friends? How can you be my friend and he's trying to hurt, and friends with him and he's trying to hurt me? That don't make good sense.
No, it don't.
But we do our best to try to stay neutral and say, well, that's between y'all.
Yeah.
You didn't have that luxury back then.
And
No
both
one can,
parties get mad at you, right?
huh?
And both parties get mad at you.
Yep, because you've proven disloyal and not only disloyal, but then dishonorable because it's understood that you're supposed to be in my corner if we're friends. No one can serve two masters honorably in the context of these masters being at odds with one another. But if the masters are friends or bound to each other by some other means, the client should be safe in receiving favors from both. So when Paul said in the Bible, no man can serve two masters, either he served God or served the devil, that wasn't just theological brilliance. That's the way that they saw the world. How are you going to be friends with God and the devil? That doesn't work. You're either going to be friends with God. You're going to be a part of the kingdom. You're going to ascribe to the values of the kingdom. You're going to live that out, or you're going to be a part of the world system, and you're going to be a part of the devil, and you're going to be serving the devil. You can't have two patrons. I'm not going to.
That makes sense.
So here's where this dilemma plays itself out in a very practical sense. The Christian community has gotten itself twisted up in knots trying to figure out what to do in the political system. Forget about who the candidates are and think about what the issues are. This candidate stands for A, but he stands for position A, which is not biblical, but he also wants to increase my Medicare. He also wants to increase the amount of weeks that I can be on unemployment. He also wants to make sure that everybody gets a $200 refund check in the mail. And so there's the government offering all of these things that will make my life easier. But what they believe in is not something that Christians are supposed to co-sign. And how do I sort that out? And it's not an easy thing to do. Democracy you don't see in the Bible because Christians didn't have a chance to vote. But part of the reason that we struggle and part of the reason that we've gotten so jammed up against the wall to where we are is that we forgot that God is our patron, not the government. And if God is our patron, regardless, nobody's going to scare me by saying that they're going to raise your taxes or they're going to cut your benefits, because my sufficiency doesn't come from the government or from First Energy. My sufficiency comes from God. He is my patron. And we get in value clashes trying to figure out how to navigate people offering to give me stuff, people offering to do stuff for me, a raise on the job if I lie about such and such, a promotion, or getting invited into the right club if I go along with this jacked up policy to try to advance myself, forgetting about the fact that they're not my patron. God is my patron. I have to deal with them. I have to interact with them. You vote, there's certain things that you deal with, but I'm not going to be afraid of standing on what I believe is right because somebody's going to cut my health insurance. Because health comes from God. Healing comes from God. And whichever way it falls, I have to decide who is my patron and who am I going to trust. Is it in God I trust, or is it in Obama I trust? He's the president right now. If it was Bush, I'd have said Bush. So I have to decide who do I trust to take care of and make sure that I'm okay. Let's move on. Finally, the grateful person would look for an occasion to bestow timely gifts or services. So along with increasing the fame and along with being loyal, I'm also looking to try to do something for somebody when I can to help them. I may not be able to pay back what I received, but what I am going to try to do is do something for the person when I can. I will do what I can when I can, even if I never actually am able to pay back in kind what I got. So that's what gratitude looks like. Gratitude is increasing the person's honor, being loyal, and doing what you can for them when you can. Questions, comments so far? Thoughts?
I was looking at the patron mediator client relationship, and one thing that hit me was between Dee Dee and Glenn, we had a relationship like that, and I didn't even pay attention to it. I was the client, and Dee Dee and Glenn were the patrons, and that for years was the way that we dealt with one another. And it wasn't until just now that I recognized it.
Well, that's because we don't talk in terms of those kind of dynamics anymore. Those are what we would call your really, really, really good friends, because they operate with an honorable perspective, and they're not just out to get what they can get out of it. And there's this give and take that exists over time, and it's hard to find these days. It's hard to find in people, but we don't talk patron-client mediator because that construct is faded out of our society. So we're going to move on a little bit. The dance of grace. The careful listener may already have observed some apparent contradictions in the code of grace. Rather than make the system fall apart, these contrary principles result in a creative tension between the mindset that must guide the giver and the mindset that should direct the recipient of favor. So in other words, it may seem a little bit difficult to imagine, how do I give something knowing that I'm supposed to be getting something back, but not expecting that? Those two don't, if I'm supposed to just be giving out the goodness of my heart and just interested in their well-being and not looking for anything in return, but I know I'm supposed to be getting gratitude and grace back, how does a person balance that out in their mind? In reality, it's probably not possible in its entirety. And where it manifests itself is the next time the person comes around asking for something else.
Yeah. Something bigger and greater.
Right. But the attitude that guides us and the way that we balance this out, well, first of all, the only way that this whole thing works is if both parties are doing what they're supposed to do.
Right.
And you take a chance, you hope that they're going to, and if they don't, then you know. But for the giver, the bookkeeping is simple. The bookkeeping is simple for the giver. So much is paid off or paid out. So much is paid out. If anything comes back, it's a bonus. If nothing comes back, I haven't lost anything. That's the mindset of the giver. While the giver is to train their mind to give no thought to the return and never think of a gift as lost. So it doesn't matter how much you gave them and what they did with it and whether or not you got anything back, you don't consider it a loss. That's tough. That takes some perspective and maturity. But that is the mindset. If I get something back, great. If I don't, well, I didn't give it to get anything back anyway. The recipient, on the other hand, is never allowed to forget his or her obligation and the absolute necessity of making a return. The giver is to make no record of the amount, but the recipient is to feel indebted for more than the amount. So while the giver is not worried about what he gave and whether or not it was a loss and whether or not he gets anything back, the recipient is supposed to feel indebted for more than what they got. They're supposed to feel not indebted for an amount, but there is a debt that they really don't feel like they can pay back, even over time. In cases where the recipient has taken great pains to try to return a benefit, being watchful and thoughtful for the opportunity, but simply not finding a way to help one who is far greater than himself, the one should consider that he has received his return on this benefit, while the other should know that he has not returned it. The one should release the other, while the other should feel himself bound. The one should say, I have received, and the other should say, I still owe. That's,
Can you repeat that?
yes. I'll do the whole sentence. If a person, in cases where a recipient has taken great pains to try to return a benefit, being watchful and thoughtful for the opportunity, but simply not finding a way to help somebody that's far greater. The one should consider that he has received the return of his benefit, while the other should know he has not yet returned it. The one should release the other, while the other should feel bound. The one should say, I have received, and the other, I still owe. Attitude and perspective on what grace looks like. So if Chuck Jones, who was the CEO of First Energy, were to give me a $20 million loan, in the entirety of my lifetime, I would never be able to pay that back.
Oh, for real?
Yeah, I'm not.
He couldn't expect you to anyway.
Well, he could if it's a loan. There's terms, there's conditions.
Well, most of it anyway, try to pay something.
But you pay what you can.
Yeah.
But realistically, there's no way I'm gonna pay him back in my lifetime. Not make what I make. Now, if he gives me a huge promotion, puts me up to executive assistant VP, maybe we can talk. But that's not gonna happen. But I spend my lifetime doing what I can to pay it back. At some point in time, because he makes so much more than me and he's such a higher stature, he should say, you know what, don't worry about it. You know, it's good. I, on the other hand, should always feel like I owe this man something. Even though I haven't been able to pay him back for what he's done, I owe him. Even though he's tried to release me from my debt, no, I still owe him something. I still need to do something, check up on him, see how he's doing, cut his grass, I don't know, something. Find something to do.
Yeah.
Because I still owe.
And you have a conscience.
Yeah. I am honor bound and obligated. So, you know, that's the way the dynamic is supposed to look and supposed to work. So we find an illustration of this falling apart and how big of a deal it is in the book of Matthew. And it's in your outline as well. I forgot to print that double-sided, which is why I ended up spending 4 pages on it. Matthew 18:23-35. Therefore, the kingdom of heaven can be compared to a king who decided to bring his accounts up to date with servants who had borrowed money from him. In the process, one of his debtors was brought in who owed him millions of dollars. He couldn't pay, so his master ordered that he be sold, along with his wife, his children, and everything he owed to pay the debt. But the man fell down before the master and begged him, please be patient with me and I'll pay it all. Then the master was filled with pity for him and released him and forgave his debt. So the man owes millions of dollars, can't pay it. The master was about to sell him and his family and everything the man owed. The person who owed begged for time to pay it back, and the master decided to forgive his debt. But when the man left the king, he went to a fellow servant who owed him a few $1,000s. He grabbed him by the throat and demanded instant payment. His fellow servant fell down before him and begged for a little more time. Be patient with me and I'll pay it, he pleaded. But his creditor would not wait. He had the man arrested and put in prison until the debt could be paid in full. When some of the other servants saw this, they were very upset. They went to the king and told him everything that had happened. The king called the man he had forgiven and said, you evil servant, I forgave you that tremendous debt because you pleaded with me. Shouldn't you have compassion on your fellow servant just as I had pity on you? Then the angry king sent the man to prison to be tortured until he had paid his entire debt. That's what my heavenly Father will do if you refuse to forgive your brothers and sisters from your heart. This parable taught by Jesus demonstrates the expectations that accompany grace. So we're going to look at this from a grace perspective. The servant asked for patience, but the king gave forgiveness. The servant owed the king millions of dollars. While that's still a large sum of money today, for the people of that day, it may as well have been the national debt of the United States of America. Individuals of that day did not have savings accounts where they stored what they had left over to pay their expenses. In their society, either you were dirt poor, living well under our poverty standards, or you were wealthy. There was no saving up or debt consolidation or mediation plans available at that time. So when it came time to reconcile the books, the king was prepared to seize and sell all that the debtor had, including himself and the family. It was unseemly and dishonorable for an individual to accrue that much debt. That's one of the things that gets overlooked. This is a fairly common passage of scripture, but the idea that somebody in that day could accrue that big of a debt spoke to a huge problem on their end. It was dishonorable, it was unseemly, and I don't have time to go further into it. but the apparent severity of the collection was warranted by the severity of the dishonor of the servant. So you reconcile your books, you find out this person owes me millions of dollars. I'm gonna do whatever I need to do to get. And it's a servant. This isn't just somebody. This is somebody who lives in my house that I'm taking care of, and he's been borrowed from me. And I'm gonna sell his stuff, sell his kids, sell his wife, and I'm gonna get this money back. This is further demonstrated by the fact that the servant asks for time and promises to pay a debt that neither he nor his children nor his children's children could possibly cover in their lifetimes. So this person owes all this money, and he's about to be sold, and stuff's about to be sold, and he comes to the king and says, I'm gonna pay you back. I know how much you make. I know you can't pay this back. Why would you go and make a promise to pay something that you know you can't pay back? You used to work in the call center. I'm not gonna start that. You already know what I'm talking about. But I'm gonna pay, and I know good and well that you can't. So what the king does is he's moved with compassion rather than give the debtor time to break a promise because he can't pay. He's not going to pay that back. The king forgives the debt. The forgiveness of the debt is an act of grace. And in this generous gesture, he transforms the debtor to a client who now has the king as a patron. So that's an act of grace. You owe me millions of dollars, I'm going to wipe this debt away. Rather than try to get it back from you, rather give you time so that way, and we end up, I'm gonna just forget the whole thing. It's a gracious act. The graciousness of the king stands as an object lesson to the children of God about the graciousness of the Father. The servant asked for what he thought he needed, in this case, time to fix his mess. And instead, the master gave him what he really needed, forgiveness of his debt. The man asked for mercy, but received grace. Mercy would have allowed the man time to repay his debt with the penalty of default hanging over him. Grace eliminated the debt and set him free from judgment. People tend to pray according to what they think that they need to fix the situation. This man was in a situation where he wanted time to fix it himself, a situation that he could never fix. Thank God that he grants petitions according to what's necessary to restore the person according to his sovereign wisdom rather than try to let them fix the situation. Many a person has asked for help from someone having received exactly what they asked for and found themselves right back in the same circumstances or worse. I'm not the only person that's done that in their life, am I?
No.
Asked for something, got what you asked for, ended up in the exact same situation 3 months later, 2 weeks later. A person who asks for a loan from a friend, or a person who asks for extensions on bills due, or a person who asks for more than one chance to fix a broken relationship often finds themselves frustrated by failure because the problem isn't the situation. The situation is just a symptom. That's why I said that this man's $1 million debt was not his problem. There was a deeper issue somewhere along that way. And rather than leave him bound in that, he gives him forgiveness. God is an all-wise God who sees and knows exactly what's needed to solve problems. And in his graciousness grants what is needed rather than what is requested. His grace invites mankind into the dance of grace, a lifelong relationship, and exchanges grace for grace. So now here we have the king who has released this man from his debt, and he doesn't ask for anything in return. He doesn't commission him to go draw a painting of me or go put up a monument. He simply says that your debt is forgiven, doesn't demand or ask for anything back. Yet it was understood in that culture that grace must be met with grace. That's why we said grace has 3 definitions. One of those definitions is what's actually given. Grace is to be met with grace. This is a 2-way transaction. It's a reciprocal relationship. While nothing more is financially owed because all debts were forgiven, the status of the client came with certain honor-bound duties. The client is expected as a matter of honor to do everything in his power to enhance and honor the patron, publicizing the benefits and showing the patron respect, to remain loyal to the patron, and to provide services whenever the opportunity arose. That's the gratitude piece. Thus, while grace is freely given, it does not come without responsibilities. I wish I had a megaphone to be able to broadcast that across every single church in the country, because most of the time people look at grace as just God giving me stuff. And I'm going to shout about it, and I'm going to go home and do what I want to do. Grace comes with responsibilities. Grace comes with a binding of honor. Many people treat grace as though it is an American Express black card in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, or a malfunctioning ATM that constantly dispenses cash from the bank of Jesus Christ. In truth, the disposition of grace is the initiation or continuation of a reciprocal relationship that expects grace be met with grace and gratitude of action. Not gratitude of action. Not your tears, not your warm fuzzy feelings and the hug that you give, but gratitude of action. Ubiquitous expressions of praise offered in the course of a church service, while always appropriate, are not a fulfillment of this obligation. Good Lord, I wish I could. Grace is reciprocated, on the other hand, in daily living and interaction with others, where the honor of God is magnified in other people's eyes through their experiences with us. Let me back that up. Expressions of praise. God's done some good, something, stand up on your feet. If God's been good to you, stand up on your feet. Clap your hands, stomp your feet, shout hallelujah. God's been always appropriate. Expressions of praise offered in the course of a church service are always appropriate, but they do not fulfill the obligation of grace. Grace is reciprocated. In other words, I give grace back to God in daily living and interacting with others, wherein through those interactions, God is magnified in their eyes by what they experience through us. The servant, something else that we want to look at. The servant was well within his rights to demand collection on the debt that was owed to him. It's worth noting for contextual purposes that the problem in this passage, what lands this $1 million debt or in jail, is not the attempt of the forgiven to try to collect on a debt owed to him by another. He had every right to try to collect and arguably had a greater need. If a billionaire writes off a few $1 million debt, the billionaire is not going to go hungry. But if someone makes $20,000 and a few $1,000s is owed to him, that's kind of a big deal. So the man was broke. Somebody owed him a few $1,000s. It's a big deal. And he's not condemned for trying to collect. The problem was that the forgiven man was a client of the master and seemed to forget that he also owed a debt of grace. The debt of grace did not preclude him from trying to collect on outstanding debts. However, it should have governed how he went about the collecting of the debt and to what lengths he was willing to pursue to collect, even if they were within his rights. He was the patron of another, and that should have constrained his conduct in the matter. That's to say, everything that this man did when he found the guy who owed him $1,000 was perfectly legal. Everything that he did was perfectly within his rights, from saying, pay me now, to having him thrown in jail until he could get the money paid. That was commonplace, standard operating procedure. He was within his legal rights to do that, but he owed a debt of grace to somebody else that should have affected and constrained the way he went about trying to collect this. There are times in life where what a person has the right to do and what they are honor bound to do may come into conflict. American culture concerns itself with rights more than honor. We feel like we have a right to rights that nobody ever promised we had, and we have no sense of whether it's right to exercise that right, to say nothing of nobility and honor. Sounds convoluted, but we want what's ours, and we're going to get it by whatever means we legally have the right to do. Grace, the idea of being honor bound to treat somebody differently and to be differently, is something that's a little bit foreign to us, that we owe somebody else a debt of gratitude, nothing legal. And so even though I got a right to grab you by your throat, even though I got a right, that's what this guy did, I'm just saying. Even though I got a right to grab you by your throat, even though I got a right to get in your face, even though I got a right to tell you what I think of you and what your name ought to be, I owe somebody something else, and that's going to govern the way that I interact with you. And I'm going to sometimes forego what I have a right to do in order to fulfill the debt that I owe to my patron. The other servants weren't concerned with the debt collection. This is what landed him in jail, but about how it reflected upon the king. Americans understand that it's tacky for a man who had $1 million debt forgiven to throw somebody in jail over a couple $1,000s. We get that. Yet the man had the legal right to do so. And so a lot of folks would say, well, he had the right to his money. He needed his money. It's, we're kind of on the fence about it. Similarly, it's not likely that the servants were concerned with the plight of the $1,000 debtor. This was a fairly routine debt resolution. The problem is how the action of the $1 million debtor reflected on his patron. That's what had the servants going back to talk to the king. Their concern was for the honor of their master. The client had an opportunity to increase the fame of his patron by forgiving the debt as he had been forgiven in the name of the patron. That is to say to this man, I have been forgiven, so I'm going to forgive. Or he could have simply agreed to allow his debtor time to pay. That would have been seen as a gracious act, would have made him look good, would have made his master look good. One of the acts of gratitude is increasing the honor of your patron. Either course of action would have made him look good and done the same as a response to the grace from his patron. The servants reported back to the king because instead of meeting grace with grace, the actions of his client dishonored the king. Such was the most egregious violation of the dance of grace. The behavior of the client in this matter, while keeping with the law, did not enhance the honor of the patron, and the client's lack of awareness of that fact showed intense disloyalty. In other words, the client was out for himself, worried about what he was entitled to, worried about what he had a right to, thought nothing of what his actions and how his actions might reflect on the man that forgave him. Disloyal. No concern for the fact that what I do reflects on somebody else, and I have a debt obligation to increase the fame of somebody else, which means I can't just go act any kind of way because my name is attached to them now. People know this is my friend. People know I've been forgiven. When the story of this got told, the client who had this $1 million forgiven would have been known as the man the king forgave. When you took, that guy that the king forgave the $1 million, the king's name is attached to this now. Calling into question the wisdom of the king and bestowing grace on the individual. The $1,000 debtor, his family, and his friends would have come to know whom the king forgave, that the man that the king forgave had him thrown in jail. So, okay, Bishop Johnson used this as an example on an ordination service, and I thought it was very appropriate. When he was ordaining some ministers, he wanted them to understand that my name is attached to you now. If you leave out the service and go kill somebody, they're gonna be talking about that person that Bishop Joey just ordained last night. Because even though my name's Mike, if I just got ordained by Bishop Joey, the next day, Mike just got ordained by Bishop Joey. Now Bishop Joey's name is attached to the mess Mike done did. That's what we do today, let alone what they did back then. There was an attachment. Thus, the king dealt with the dishonorable client who had broken the relationship with his insensitivity to that relationship. So it wasn't the collection of debt that landed him in jail, but the fact that he completely forgot about the fact that he had a honor-bound obligation of grace to repay the king. Being a recipient of grace leaves a person inextricably linked with the identity of the patron. The actions of the client no longer exist within an isolated individualistic bubble of personal actions or even within the context of familial honor. To the honorable person, this is not seen as a burden. Rather, it is an honor. To have one's name tied to someone greater than someone else is an honor. To be of service to someone greater is an honor. It only seems burdensome to those who lack honor or gratitude, thereby breaking the dance. So to some people, it might seem a little bit messed up that because somebody did something for me, now I got to act a certain way because it reflects on them. That is an attitude of ungratefulness and ingratitude. To feel like you're burdened because you have to act like you got some sense because somebody's done something for you.
Yeah.
Shouldn't have accepted it to begin with. That's why if you don't want people to know that this gift that it was done for you, don't take it. If you don't want to live in a way that's going to reflect well on the person who has blessed you and benefited you, don't accept it. Because grace must always be met with grace. To wrap this up, much is said in pulpits about the liberty of grace. Much is said in pulpits across churches about the liberty of grace. Little is said about the bondage or constraints that come with grace. God does not bestow grace for the sake of making man subservient to him. He does so out of his love for humanity and concern about our best interests. Yet such beneficence, as understood by the people of that time, came with obligations of honor. They were honor bound to enhance the honor of their patron. They were honor bound to be loyal to their patron. They were honor bound to repay the patron. And if they couldn't repay it, then they had to pay it forward. While there were no legal or contractual machinations to enforce this concept, it was deeply ingrained in the collective psyche of the people of that day. The blessings and favor of God should not be understood in a transactional manner of one-way grace. If there's nothing else that you take from what we've talked about thus far, is that grace is not a one-way proposition. Grace is not just God opening the door and making the way, but grace is also your response to what is being done. And as you pray to God, as he answers your prayers, as he blesses you, there is an understanding when you use the term grace, it's talking about both what he does and how you respond to it. And how you respond to it honors what he does. And we'll talk more about what is amazing about God's grace as we move forward, because or the next time we meet in June, because as we said, in that day, there were lots of people that were gracious, and it was good to be gracious, and it was good to be considered a gracious person. But there's something about the grace of God that is unique and makes it amazing and makes it different than what anybody else has ever done. And we need to understand, now that we know that grace was something available through man, we need to understand what it was different about God. Or grace was available even in a polytheistic society through the gods. You could receive grace from this God or that God or this God or that God. So what about God's grace is amazing. And that's where we're headed in June. But we ought to view the blessings and favor of God as part of a relationship of reciprocity, a partnership of dance to the benefit of everyone. While the price has already been paid by Christ, believers are to approach the relationship as though they owe a debt that will take a lifetime to repay. It is this dance of grace and not the perceived rights and entitlements that dictate the choices made by Christians. Grace must be the foundational consideration in every decision of human action for believers. And in the way that I interact with everybody, whether they like me, whether they don't like me, whether they've stabbed me in the back, whether they've talked about me, whether they've taken advantage of me, grace for the Christian, for the believer, must be the foundational consideration in every decision of human interaction. How I respond to them, whether I speak to them, whether I walk the other way when I see them coming, whether I try to cut the conversation short because I don't feel like talking to them, whether I actually take the time to see how they're doing or know that I can help them and help them. Grace, the fact that I am recipient of God's grace, the fact that I owe a debt that I can't repay, has to be what constrains and guides what I do, how I treat them, how I interact with them, and who I am to them. Because I owe God something greater than what I have a right to. It's a bigger consideration than what I'm entitled to. That's the reciprocity of grace. That's the dance of grace with God. Is that in all of my dealings, in every single relationship I have with my friends, with those who would call me their enemy, with those who like me, with those who don't like me, I owe it to God to interact with them in a manner that reflects that I've received grace. Questions? So where we're going next time we meet, and that will be in June because we have 5 Sundays this month. So June, I believe, let me double check my calendar, 5th. June 5th will be the next time we meet. I will, by that point in time, have the keys to our new place. We won't be in there yet, but I will be able to take you out to see it. At least I don't think we'll be in there yet. Maybe we can pull off a miracle and get that done in that short of a period of time, but I'd like to sleep at some point in time. I'm sure everybody else would too.
Oh, yeah. I've been telling people about it, make our Bible study grow now.
We hope so. We're looking for that. Thank you very much. So if there's no other questions,